Hello everyone, nice to be tuning in with you again for another youth group online. How is everyone doing? I'm guessing you've all been at home for the past week with the schools being shut at the end of last week, so I really hope that is all going well. Really hope that you are managing to still do work and to still engage with school life and with study and everything like that. So yes, I really hope that that's going well. Some of you I would have spoken to this week. I'm trying to try and get in touch with all of you to get your numbers so that perhaps we can do a group chat at some point, or just so that I can keep in touch with you a little bit more, just to check in with you and your families and check that you're all doing well. So if you haven't heard from me yet, you should be hearing from me in the next week or so, just for a catch up, just to check in with you. To see how you're doing. So yes, really hope you and your families are doing all right at this time, in this weird, crazy time of everything that's happening. So well done for all that you're doing, and keep going with all the work and family life that you can do. Cool. So this morning we're looking at another parable of Jesus, and I guess the question I want us to be thinking about as we talk about this parable together is why are you a Christian, and what it meant for you when you first responded to God's call. So why are you a Christian, and what did it mean for you when you first responded to God's call? So that's kind of, I guess, what I'm wanting us to think about this morning as we look at this parable. And the parable that we're going to look at is like really completely focused around a wedding feast, a wedding celebration, which is really interesting. How at the moment we can't have any weddings at all. We can't have any sort of parties, any sort of celebrations, any feasts of people. So we're looking at. I guess for me that kind of makes, how exciting it's going to be when we're not in this situation anymore, when we can meet up with people, we can celebrate together, we can eat together and have parties and celebrate together. How exciting that will be. And that kind of that for me was really interesting, because in the Jewish tradition, the idea of a wedding feast or a wedding banquet is a massive deal. It's this huge honour, this huge occasion, in the same way that it probably will be for us when we can go back to having celebrations like that. Like, it'll be so amazing, like the first time that you can all meet up with your friends and you can all have a meal together and you can all celebrate together. That kind of excitement, I think, is what it's like for in the Jewish tradition of having a wedding, of being invited to a wedding celebration. So it's this real anticipation for this event. There's this real excitement for this event in this parable. And this real honour of being invited to something like a wedding banquet. So that is the context of this parable. So if you have a Bible, we're going to read it together. It's Matthew 22, verses 1 to 14. Matthew 22, 1 to 14. The parable of the wedding banquet. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who I've invited that I've prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fattened cattle have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding.' But they paid no attention, and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, ill-treated them, and killed them. This king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burnt their cities. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited do not deserve to come. Go to the streets and invite to the banquet anyone you can find.' So the servant went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. 'Friend,' he asked, 'how did you get in here without wearing clothes?' The man was speechless. Yet the king told his attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness. where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen. Great, so that's our passage for this morning. So we're just going to quickly go through it. Who are all these different people in this story, and what does it tell us? What does it tell us about Jesus, and what does it tell us about the kingdom of God? So the first point I really want to take from this is what happens in the first, in the first 5 verses, where the king says, I'm inviting you to my wedding banquet. Come to my wedding banquet. And then he repeats himself in verse 4. He's like, tell those who I've invited that I've prepared, and he explains what he's done. He's like, I've prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fattened cattle have been slaughtered. He's like, oh, perhaps they didn't quite understand what I was inviting them to, so let me explain it to them. Let me say, well, this feast is waiting for you. I've slaughtered these animals and we're having this feast together, so come to this wedding banquet so that we can celebrate. And yet they still don't come. They don't respond to this invitation. They go off to their fields or go off to their business, and they're just completely ignoring this invitation. And it would be the same as if you were invited to one of the royal weddings, where everyone wants to get invited to a royal wedding. It'd be like saying, ignoring that invitation, saying, oh, I don't want to go to that. There's this great honour and privilege of being invited to this. And so it's a shock for those people hearing this story that people would reject it and people would say no. And God's saying, that's what it's like when I invite you into my kingdom. That's what it's like when I invite you into a relationship with me. He's saying, I'm shocked. Why would anyone not want to come to this feast, to this fullness, and to this amazing gift that I'm inviting you into? And so my first question for us is, when God invites us, just as these people ignore this invitation from the king, do we ignore God's invitations for us, whatever that might be? Something for you to ponder. The second thing I want to pick up on is then the king says, well, these people haven't responded, the people I've invited, so he sends his servants to go onto the streets and to invite anyone who can come. It says both the good and the bad. And this is Jesus saying, the kingdom of heaven is not just open for the Jewish people. The kingdom of heaven has been opened up for all to come into, for all to be invited into. There is no one who has to remain on the outside. All can come and share this feast together. And so I guess the second thing for us to think about this morning is, just as God opens his invitation to everyone, I felt a challenge of how much do I open my invitation to friendship, to a conversation, to whatever it might be, to anyone, and how much do I judge others by accident? How often do I put people aside? But just as God opens his invitation to all people, so we are called to open our invitation of community and our invitation of friendship to all people. And my question is, for myself and for all of us, do we do that? So another thing for us to think about this morning. And the last point I want to pick up on is the last bit, which is perhaps a little bit weird, when the king comes in and notices a man not wearing the wedding clothes, and so sends him out. He's like, how can you be in here without wearing the clothes that I've given you, the wedding clothes that you're meant to be wearing? And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, what is this message? What is Jesus saying about the kingdom of God? And I think he's saying that we cannot come into the kingdom of God on our own terms, wearing the clothes that we choose to be given, that we choose to wear. We come into the kingdom of God clothed in God's righteousness, like completely aware that it's nothing about what we do, or what we have done, or who we are on our own. It's all about what Jesus has done for us and the righteousness that we get given from God, to put on that righteousness. And if you want to flick back to Isaiah in the Old Testament, chapter 61, Isaiah 61 verse 10, it says, I delight greatly in the Lord, my soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. So there's this idea that God openly invites us to be clothed in his righteousness, to come into his wedding banquet wearing the clothes that he gives us, fully aware that we can't come in by any merit that we've done, but we've done ourselves, by any clothing that we have got ourselves. It has to all be from God, which is a great gift. It's not about what we do, it's about all that God has done for us in Jesus. But we have access to those clothes of righteousness from God. So I guess my question for us to think about from that is, do we try to get in God's kingdom, or do we think about our relationship with God as being driven by all the good stuff that we do, by the merits that we think that we have, or do we see ourselves as saved completely by God through Jesus Christ, and we sit in his righteousness and not in our own righteousness? So my final question for us this morning is that. So I guess the main point I really want us to be thinking about from this is, first of all, do you realise that you've been called by God? So this story opens with the king, who is God, calling all these people to share in his feast. So do you realise that you've been called by God? We started off by thinking about why it is that you're a Christian, and for each one of us, we're Christians because God first called us to be with him. So I want you to take from this the encouragement that God has called you to be part of this celebration, to be part of his kingdom, to be in a relationship with him. You've been called by God. Do you realise that you've been called by God? And the second thing I want us to take away, I guess, is, do you know what you've been called into? So just in the same way that the king is like, oh, maybe they don't understand, like, tell them that I have this oxen and have slaughtered all this cattle, and we're having this huge feast, like trying to paint a picture for the servants about how great this feast is. Do you realise that the greatness and the fullness of God and all that is available to you in Jesus Christ? And just to, I guess, to encourage you that there is so much available in our relationship with Jesus. There is so much goodness, there's so much greatness that comes from being in that relationship. So just to encourage you to realise that that God has called you to himself, that he dresses you in his righteousness, and there is so much abundance waiting for each of you, for each of us, as we journey in our relationship with God. So that's what I've taken from this parable on the wedding banquet. If you've got any questions or any thoughts, then feel free to put comments. I'm sorry I didn't open up the comments option last week, so you couldn't put any comments, but feel free to put any comments this week if you want to, or any questions you have, and I'm really happy to have a discussion with you about this if you have any more questions from the passage. So thanks for watching. I should be in touch with most of you this coming week, and I really hope you're doing well. Please do send in any prayer requests you might have for you or your family as we remain connected at this time. Have a good week.